So I just want to talk to you a little bit and show you how to log into Gear, and I will also try to go through and explain some of the features. So there's really two parts of Gear. There's the public interface, which is what you see when you're looking at the main interface or searching for anything. And then there's the back end of it, which is where all the work or not all the work, but most of the work happens. So if you go to gear.athenstech.edu/admin you will come up with a login interface, and you'll see there's a place for you to choose if you want it to remember you. You can choose to reset your password, and there's information about the version number down here. Just going to click on login, and you're going to see a dashboard. It will look a little bit different from versions of Omeka or Omeka, depending on how you see it. You will see that some versions are a little bit different, but basically there will be a place to log in. There will be your username, and then information up here about a few things, and then some information over here, and more information on the side. Ours does look a little bit different from a default installation in the fact that we have so many plugins supporting this site. And I'll talk more about plugins later in as much as I can. A couple of things to note. If you delete in Gear, there is no real undo delete or undo button, so you need to be very careful when you're working in Gear. The other thing to note is that although it will tell you when an upgrade's available, it does not tell you if your plugins are also compatible with that upgrade. So what that means is before you actually do an upgrade, you have to check each plugin to see if it's compatible, and if it's not compatible, to either turn that plugin off, to delete that plugin, or to rewrite that plugin so it is compatible with the new version. So there's a lot of good reason to wait a little bit further along in the development cycle for the upgrades to make sure that the plugins get upgraded. I will say that not all plugins will get upgraded, but they may still be compatible with the newer version of Omeka. In order to get them to work with that newer version, even if they are compatible, you have to do some rewriting of customized code. So it is a little bit tricky. It's not just a matter of upgrading one piece of software. It's a matter of upgrading a piece of software and then also checking all of those plugins and making sure they're compatible and rewriting the ones that are not if we still want to use them. A couple other things: you can see how many users we have. You can see our theme. It is based upon Berlin, but it is a revised theme because it's heavily modified. You can see how many collections we have. We have 23. These are public and private collections. Some of the collections are actually used for processing and to sort of sort things before they actually go into their various categories. You can also see how many tags we're using, and tags are very important in Omeka as they also create some of those hooks for searching and retrieval. So our tags are incredibly important in terms of what we're using. The other thing that happens with collections is each collection has its own collection number, and those are very important to searching as well. You see here we have 1,276 items. That is both public and private items. Private items, of course, do not display to the public. So when you first upload something to Omeka, it's always private because we don't want something that's uploaded without having complete cataloging or metadata work done. So you see here I just finished one. So I just uploaded the Omeka timeline that I created for the project grant. So that is one that I just uploaded, and so you can see in this situation it actually has the name and things like that. Here are 3 that I uploaded just the file, and so they have nothing at all associated with them. It's just a file. You can see over here these are the collections I've been working with, and that's just the order that they're listed in, and of course there is no indication here in terms of whether or not they're public or private. In terms of other information you can find here, there's system information. There's a lot of information here about actually what we're using to drive Omeka. You can't make any edits to this page, and this is not a place where you would make those edits because this is pulling from our server. A lot of what Omeka does in terms of file size and in terms of memory allocation and in terms of MIME types and all of that kind of stuff comes directly from what is on the server side. So it is pulling directly from what it's able to read from the server. Down here at the bottom is a list of plugins, and we'll actually look at plugins in a lot more detail. There's also support forums here. Those are support forums that are run by the programmers and developers of Omeka. And Omeka is a little different from other open source software because although it is open source, it is very much driven by a development community. So there are a lot of resources there, but it's a little bit different than going out to some of those other open source communities. So going back to our dashboard, if you go back to the dashboard, the other things you can see is you can see a place to add a new item. There are multiple places to add new items and multiple ways to add new items. But I just want to kind of go in and show you what a form looks like and show you what a completed one looks like first. So if we just click on this one, and we could either click on edit or click on the item itself, you'll see there are two files associated here, and I'll explain more about why that is and what needs to happen with that, because that's not quite right. So you'll see here there's a title, and we are using a modified GMD, that's a modified general material designator. There's a lot of reasons for using this, but I'm just going to leave it at that for now. It doesn't, OCLC is, for those of you who are catalogers, OCLC is starting to remove all GMDs because it's been 3 years past RDA implementation. So GMDs are going the way of the dinosaur very quickly. But for the purposes of what we're doing and the fact it's a Dublin Core related database, that's actually okay for us to do, and I think it's fine to leave it there. So I would not remove the GMDs because that was actually a purposeful decision that I made in terms of display. And if you look at the public list and you look at how things display when people are searching, you can see how useful that is. We do not have the ability to be able to use those new mark fields for formats and things like that. So then there's a place for description, creator, and of course any place you see that the color changes, that means it's a link. So you can see all of our subject headings are links, and since this is a project management document about my work, I put myself in as a subject too. That is my actual authorized format of my name, so unless somebody's changed my authority record. But anyway, if you go out there, you'll see it. Publisher, ATC ×3 consortia, date. For most things, I use the date on the item following traditional cataloging rules, but if it does not have a date, then I'm going to use either a date that's an approximate date, or I'm going to use the recent date. I am adding source notes, and if you look at the metadata best practices, there's information and examples for how to do each of these fields. Of course, format, that's just your traditional sort of what kind of format you have. Text, these are all Dublin Core, following Dublin Core guidelines for inputting metadata. And then since we're following RDA practices, we're spelling out pages. So, and then of course a provenance statement, because that's very important to know where this material came from. The rights statement in this case is coming directly from the TAC grant. Now the archival material and photographs have their own rights statement. So there's actually 4 different rights statements in addition to the OER textbooks that have individual rights statements. We actually have 4 different rights statements. There's a history log here, so this tells a little bit about how it was created. So this was created by me, and it lists what elements were altered or updated at that time. So that's sort of the basics of what we have in terms of the general information. We have a title, a description, creator, subjects, Publisher, date copyrighted. Occasionally we will have a different date if there's a date associated with an item, but it's not the date copyrighted, then I use date copyrighted and date. Source, that's just a traditional where did the title come from kind of statement. Format, type, and extent, those are all very traditional, following Dublin Core best practices for how to cite those. And then provenance and rights. So those are sort of the those are sort of the big buckets in terms of what we're doing. Then if you look over here on the side, there are actually some other information. These are other places of the form. So there's whether or not something is public or featured, and I'll explain more about that later, what collection it belongs in, and then there's file metadata information here. If you look down here at the bottom, here is all of our metadata schemas, or metadata sort of translation tools. So we have all the different ways that it can be harvested and displayed for each particular item. Gear also does a very nice thing of creating a citation. So this actually displays to the user, and it's publicly, it's created automatically, and it's publicly available. Our Creative Commons license, again, is the same sort of thing, and I'll show you how to fix that and edit that in a minute. And then finally, there are statistics down here at the bottom that show how much each item might be used, how many times it's been viewed, and how many times it's been embedded. So we'll look at the public page very quickly. So the public page, you all know what this looks like. So if you notice here, there's this Omeka timeline 2016 XML. I've been deleting the XML files, and the main reason I'm deleting them is because of how they display in terms of our information. So there's my little timeline, multi-page timeline goes forward. But the reason why the XML shows up that way, if we can get our screen to scroll, is that that's actually the harvesting protocol aspect of it. So if you look, then it gives us the ability to actually harvest what information's in there. So here's all of the information that we were just looking at. Title, there's the description, there is information. This is very traditional cataloging information, using that principle of RDA creatorship. In Dublin Core, everything in terms of authorship is considered to be a creator, so that actually maps up more with Dublin Core than traditional AACR2 cataloging does. And if you there's our subjects, so if you click on those, it'll actually take you to a search for those. Again, publisher, date copyrighted, source, format, all of that kind of stuff. There's that big rights statement. And then, of course, there's a collection. So if you click on it, it takes you to the collection. And this is all in the public interface. Files for download actually provides a way for people to be able to download the individual files. And that's some custom coding I created. So this is not part of Omeka. This is something I created. Citation, that is part of Omeka, and it's created automatically when you create it. Social bookmarking, that's a plugin that I added. License, again, there's a plugin I've added, and there's a catalog search too that will go out and search for similar or related records related to that. There's an embed code as an iframe, so if someone wanted to embed this into their website or whatever, they could. And then, of course, we have all kinds of stuff down here at the bottom. So I think that kind of gives you a brief overview in terms of what you may see here. And just to show you what the work form looks like, and they're all a little bit different from each one. So this is the part of it that if I had had time, I would have rebuilt, because the back end to me is not as robust and user-friendly as it could be. You do have some things here that are really helpful. There are links to dublincore.org and the documentation there. I would suggest that you start with our metadata guidelines and practices, because there's actually real-world examples in there that are similar to what we would use in Gear. So to create something, you're just going to add something, And this really follows traditional cataloging. So you have one title, you have one description, although you could have another description. So if you had two things you wanted to put in there, you could. Traditionally, I'm using one authorship, using whichever is the first author listed on the item, sort of following those traditional cataloging rules. However, you could certainly add multiple authors in Dublin Core, or you can add them as contributors, which is further down the list. A table of contents, you can add that if you want to, and there's particular ways of formatting that following cataloging best practices, but for digital library work, you can kind of do what you want there a little bit. And then subjects, and of course these are all Library of Congress subjects, so I'm just going to add one so you can kind of see how that pop-up works, and hopefully it will work, because it doesn't always. See if we can get it to come up. So that's how it should work. You should start typing and you should see the Library of Congress actually authorized subject heading come up. There are times that it's pulling from other controlled vocabularies, so you may get things that aren't legitimate subject headings. That's one of those times where it's helpful if you know a little bit more about subject headings to be able to actually go in and verify to see if they work. So I'm just going to delete that because we're not going to use that. Publisher, again, if you need to add multiple publishers, you would just add an input and then you're going to add that multiple publishers. If you needed to edit this, you could just, very, very traditional, just go in and edit. And any changes you make are going to be, as soon as you click on save, they're going to be instantaneous. Of course, scrolling down, as you can see, this is a pretty long form. And unfortunately, without rewriting the work form, there's no way to hide the fields that we're not using, and there's no way to move them up in order. So I can't just reorder them as they are. So you really do have to go through the field. Once you do it for a while, you will know where those fields are. So you have 4 different parts you go through here. The Dublin Core part, which is the metadata cataloging part of it. You also have the item type. So for the grant materials, it's all grant document, and that's a specific item type that I've created. And then you're going to add in the affiliation. And this is actually very important because it helps with retrieval and search. So some of those searches that are built for each institution really are hinging upon whether or not this information is put in there. So you put an item type, and then you're going to go in files, and you see here there's 2 files listed. The XML file is what I consider to be a temporary file because it's just to provide full text searching, and it's just, in my opinion, temporary. Certainly there are systems that probably keep it, so I delete that one. And in this case you have an undo, but it's just very temporary. So if I wanted to undo it immediately, I could, but once I click save, it is done. There is no undo at that point. So I'm going to keep only the PDF file, and I could add some, you can see I have some Dropbox files down there. I could add other files if I wanted to add something else or replace it, I could do it there. Then I'm going to go over and choose my licenses. For everything that's associated with the grant, it is allow remixing, which is CC BY. For the items that are in the photograph collection and for some of the other things, we are using CC BY NC share alike. So that means that it's non-commercial, prohibit commercial use, and share alike. So that means that it can't be used commercially and it's required a share alike. In this case, it's a grant material, so we're going to choose allow remixing. The other thing, this is an image, but if it was, we would have to choose zoom. And then the very last step is to type in all of the tags. And like I said, this is one of the most critical pieces that you can do. And it should be that you can just pop in a list. Let's see. and you're just going to type in your tags, and that's all the tags I have for right now for that. So you're just going to type in your tags, and once you do, it'll populate at the bottom. There is not a tag list for particular types of materials. I just haven't written that up yet. I mean, it's possible, but I was still in the process of developing that. So once you get that done, so you go through 5 sections. You go through your Dublin core, and you go through the full work form. You go through your item type metadata, and those either follow traditional Dublin core metadata standards for item types, or you're going to go in and choose grant materials if it's grant. That one has its own category, as does ebooks in the OER collection. Those two have their own categories. Other than that, everything's going to follow a very traditional standard Dublin core metadata item type. Then you're going to go and add any files or delete that XML file. Then you're going to update your Creative Commons. If it's a photograph, you have to turn the zoom on, or the zoom feature doesn't work. And then once you do that, you're going to save your tags. And then once you do that, you can click save, and you'll see our little XML thing went away. And then you can go look at the public page, and everything's going to look pretty much the same because we already had content loaded there. And that is the basics of how you work in Gear very quickly.